Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. So total domestic box office was almost $146 million, which constitutes a 77% jump from the previous weekend. This makes sense, right? Because August, as we all know, is really like a dearth of box office numbers. Usually it's, August. And for the longest time, like January and maybe parts of February were considered like what you just dump. Any movies you don't know where else to release in the calendar year, you just dump them then. January and February have become bigger players, but August still seems to be, again, kind of a slower period. But most of that jump here, because what was it last week? So last week was about 79 million for the weekend. So most of this jump is due to the number one movie, which we'll talk about in just a second. But for returning viewers, as you may see, I've added a couple things to my chart here. I'm always trying to improve here at Cinema QSO. So I've added a column for what's called the domestic multiple. So essentially, this is a way to kind of track if a movie has legs, right? You've heard me say it before on the show. This idea that can a film sustain itself week after week, or does it just have a big splashy open and then kind of drop off significantly after that first weekend? So over in the in that column, I have it basically it's calculated by taking the total domestic box office and then dividing it by the opening, right? So ideally, you want a bigger number as the result, because that means that it's not like, because if you opened at 50 million and then your domestic total is 60 million, that means that 60 divided by 50 is like 1 point something. It means that most of your money came in that opening weekend, right? So if it's over 2, I'm going to put in yellow. If it's over 3, I'm putting green. And then if it's over 4, it's getting a nice big blue square here. Also over on the far left, in terms of the ranking, I also have some color coding. If it's blue, that means it's a new movie coming out. If it's green, it means it actually jumped up in its ranking of the week. If it's yellow, it stayed the same. And if it's red, it dropped. So just for those of you returning, you may have noticed some changes here. So let's talk about that first, the movie that made it into number one spot, Beetlejuice. Oh, good thing I didn't say it 3 times. Opening very large. I should say big. I don't know why I said open. Very large. Opened to about 110 million, which is right in the projections. Right, I projected anywhere from 100 to 125 million. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but supposedly this is like one of the best September openings for a movie ever. And 2024 is a really interesting box office year, because at the first half, it's like that meme where it's like they had us in the first half, not gonna lie, right? Because the first half of the year was so abysmal following the strikes. There was a malaise and concern in the industry about do audiences want to go back to the theaters? What kind of stuff do they want to go see in the theater? But then Inside Out 2 kind of broke the dam, so to speak. So I feel like every big movie that was supposed to be big has been big since Inside Out 2. And have been breaking all these records. Now, of course, records are easy to break when you're not counting for inflation. If Beetlejuice had opened 20 years ago, it would not have made this much money, of course, right? But again, still very good, right? And it has a $24,000 per theater average, so the best of the top 10. And this brings its worldwide total to about 145-ish million off of a $100 million budget. So it's in that yellow zone. It's crossed that initial threshold of its budget, but ideally you want to double that budget, right? But my review's actually coming out for it tomorrow, so if you want to track that, you can go to cinemaqso.substack.com. I'm going to have my review up for that. I thought it was fine. I thought it was decent. But again, I think I was kind of like not expecting this to do super well. So when I originally saw these initial projections, I was like, holy cow. Because Beetlejuice, while a cult classic, oftentimes sequels to cult classics, like studios go, wow, this thing is super popular, let's make a sequel. But they forget the reason why it's a cult classic and not a classic is because it didn't do particularly well. It wasn't super, super successful when it came out, right? And the Beetlejuice brand, aside from, I think, like an animated TV show briefly in the 90s, it really has had no additional media, right? So I was very skeptical that I basically thought this was going to be just like another legacy sequel that kind of just trades in nostalgia and doesn't really have much to offer, and audiences will kind of catch wind of that. And maybe we'll see that with its second weekend drop. Like, what's that drop going to be? If it's, I'm expecting it's going to be anywhere. Well, here's the thing. So there's not a bunch of stuff coming. There's not really anything huge coming out next weekend. So I'm going to say it's going to have anywhere from a 45 to 65% drop. That's my guess, just because I don't think it's particularly great. And reviews haven't been super great, and neither have been audiences' reaction. It's not like it's setting the world aflame, so to speak. So this is a big opening, but will it have those legs? Remains to be seen. What else do we have here? So in their set. Oh, actually, we also have another movie opening this weekend. Excuse me, all the way at the very bottom. That's why I almost missed it. Usually we don't have movies opening at the very, very bottom, but there's a first time for everything on Cinema Husa. So at number 10, we have A24's horror film The Front Room with Brandy from like the TV Cinderella movie with Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother. I feel like she hasn't been in stuff in like forever. I really don't know much about this movie. I had said that last week, and then I saw a trailer for it the other day and was like, oh, wait, I've seen the trailer for this movie. It's about, like, a interracial couple, and the white stepmother of the white husband moves in with them. It's this whole kind of, racist kind of thriller. It's, like, very Get Outy, right? And it feels reductive to call it like that, but that's kind of, it's like a very boilerplate A24 movie, right? Did not open very well, only opened to about 1.7-ish million, falling even below the humblest of projections at 2 to 6 million. Had the worst per theater average of the week, of the top 10, just under 800 per theater, and that constitutes both its domestic and worldwide total, and I cannot find any info about the budget. So unfortunately, we cannot compare. But unless this movie was made for a ham sandwich, this is probably going to end up being a big flop. Continuing into their second weekend, notably here we have Reagan, the biopic of our 40-something president, 41st, Ronald Reagan. Actually jumping a spot, so it actually jumped from fourth to third in its second weekend. Only made though about a little over 5 million, but a pretty decent drop, only about a 30-ish% drop, and actually added 16 theaters. So, this is a weird one. I have heard nothing but awful things about this movie. Obviously, someone like, full disclosure, I'm very, liberal's not even the right word, I'm very, very left, right? So, a biopic that is supposedly very, it's like almost mythically reverent for Ronald Reagan. Obviously, it's not going to be my cup of tea, but from my understanding, it's not even really like a good movie or good history. It's very much like let's just kind of idolize this guy, right? So I was very, for a movie that kind of has all of that around it. I mean, it clearly has enough of an audience. This brings its domestic total to about, what is it here? 18.5 million. So it's in that yellow zone for the multiple. So, if it can keep kind of going with that, with the specific niche crowd that it has, it could end up being a little moneymaker. But as of right now, it is not a moneymaker because its worldwide total is also around 18.5. It's like an extra couple $1,000, which makes sense since this is a very American film. But it was made for about $25 million. So it's still in the red. It hasn't even crossed that initial threshold. So again, this feels like a very straight to streaming or straight to digital rental movie. So I feel like any money this makes in theaters is like almost like reverse icing on the cake, and it's like it's gonna make its money later, right? Let's see. I don't think there's anything else continuing into its second weekend. I want to just highlight a couple other things. So, I want to say finally unseated, but Deadpool and Wolverine has dropped from first to second in its seventh frame. But notably, this is not the first time this happened. So it dropped, I forget at what point in its run, but it did drop to second place. I think it was when Alien Romulus debuted, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So I think it was a couple weeks ago on like mid-August. But then Alien Romulus had a big enough drop that Deadpool re-achieved its first place spot in the top 10. So this one seems like it's here to stay. If you notice here, Beetlejuice made over $100 million, and then number 2 of the box office is under 10, right? So there's obviously a huge gulf here. Deadpool and Wolverine, it's at the point where it's just about kind of making any extra dollars, right? If you notice on the domestic multiples, right, it's still in that yellow zone. So it has decent legs, but notably it's at least domestically, it's predominantly did a lot of like a third almost, more than a third of its domestic box office was in that opening weekend, right? So it hasn't been holding as well. But again, Disney's strategy for the past maybe decade has always been just huge opening. Make as much money as you can, and then to hell with longevity, right? It did have a 50-ish% drop, lost about 230 theaters, but it is pretty profitable, right, at this point. So it's made $1.3-ish billion off of a $200 million budget, so that squarely puts it into what I would call the profitable zone. Also, we have Alien Romulus, which I'm also having my review come out tomorrow. You should check out cinemacuso.substack.com. It is dropped from 2nd to 4th place in its 4th frame, so it's been out for about a month now. Just fell just below 4 million for the weekend. Pretty big drop though. Almost 60%, lost over 500 theaters. But it has decent-ish legs, right? But again, it's still, I don't want to say early, but again, it's only been out for 4 weeks, right? As opposed to a couple other films that you'll see that we'll talk about in just a moment. But this has proved to be, again, successful, but the question will be, is it successful enough for 20th Century Studios, aka Disney, to greenlight any kind of sequel or continuation of this? And of course, they will not just let the Alien franchise slumber for too long, but the question will be, will they use this to build momentum to have something that's semi-related to this, or will they just let it be dormant for like 5 or 10 years and then do another soft launch, right? But again, it's in that profitable zone at almost 300% return based off of its worldwide totals, right? And then holding its 5th place spot, in its 5th frame, we got a little 555 going on, is It Ends With Us. Of course, the controversial film based off the controversial novel about domestic abuse. This thing is a juggernaut, right? It only brought in a little under 4 million and lost like 700 theaters, but still in almost 3,000 theaters. So if you look at its domestic total, it's at 141-ish million. So it's in that yellow zone of the longevity. Again, I think if it could keep kind of sustaining itself, but again, that was a really good opening. I remember, if you've been following my channel, I was surprised that it was being projected so big because I had no idea about the novel. And again, the legions of fans have gone out, right? And if you look here, look at that percent return. Wowza, as they would say, like in the 40s, like hubba wahoo. Its worldwide total is up to 309-ish million, which is fine, whatever. But it was made for like $25 million. An 1,100+% return. That's insane. I know there's a lot of drama behind the scenes between Justin Baldoni, who's the director, and Blake Lively's co-star in the film. There's a lot of drama, and it seems to be little hope that a sequel will get made. There is a sequel novel, but if you hold the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, you'd be insane not to figure something out and get a sequel to this made, because again, that is just astounding percent of return, right? If any of you are investors out there, I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, as you can see on the rest of the column, but it can happen, right? Other notable films here, we have The Forge, which is kind of, I guess, like a Christian adjacent film. It actually jumped. It went from 7th to 6th place in its 3rd weekend. Made just a little under $3 million. But it has decent legs, right? So it's already in the green zone on multiple in just its 3rd weekend. It seems like more and more of its box office is being made after its opening weekend. And since it was only made for $5 million and has made about 21 million worldwide, I'd say that this is, has proven fairly profitable for Affirm Films, which I believe are the makers of this, or the distributors. And then we have Twisters. Very interesting case for this summer. So this was a film that opened really well, but was more expensive than you would think it would be. So it has struggled while having really great legs, as you can see here. Over on the right, it's in the green zone for its domestic multiple. It's only recently, I think it was like the last weekend, it only recently crossed that double the budget threshold. It only recently became quote unquote profitable. So despite having made $366-ish million worldwide, it's a tepid success, right? And it's flip-flopped all around. I mean, it was in third last weekend because it actually, I think, added some theaters for the holiday weekend or just got a lot more play during the holiday weekend. Dropped back down to 7th. I mean, look at that, 71% drop. That's obviously very big. But it's also been out for for about 2 months now, right? So at a certain point, the percent drop doesn't matter because, you could drop 70%, but okay. So let me pull up my notes here. Last week, it made, actually, I don't know if I can pull it up. My point being, if it dropped 71% and it only went down to 2, like it didn't have as much to go, right? So dropping 70% if you opened at like $1 billion, 70%, obviously that's way less. But at a certain point, it just becomes like the differences just become so small that it's kind of doesn't really matter at a certain point. But talk about legs. Despicable Me 4. This thing's been out for this is its 10th weekend. It dropped from 8th to 9th. Brought in just $1.8 million. Again, at this point, the percent drop doesn't really matter. But look at that domestic multiple. My God, it's in the blue zone, ladies and gentlemen, and they thems. It's nearly up to the 5 number. It has just been consistently it's been in the top 10. This and Inside Out 2. So Inside Out 2 was number 10 last week. And it had been in theaters for 12 weeks, excuse me. But this, in a sense, has better legs because it's been able to amass so much money, again, off of a relatively small budget of just $100 million, right? So it's almost up to $1 billion worldwide for its box office. Was it 930-ish? What is that? 830% return. So again, I don't know how many times I can say it without someone in Hollywood needs to listen, that if you have a movie that can perform really well over a long period of time, that's good. And it's really, really good. Because if it can hold, it almost becomes like a feedback loop. Like, if it's holding, people are like, oh, that movie's still in theaters. Maybe it must be good. And then more people will go. It'll hold longer. So even if you were to make the same amount of money, I think it's worth, making something that can really hold out and really gear your marketing towards that. Just because, again, Hollywood, I think that's what caused the big panic, is people were so concerned, like, things aren't opening as big anymore. What's going on? I think what's happening now is that while things aren't opening as big, they're holding out for longer. Okay, so before we move into the stories, I just want to, I'm going to be moving this up to the box office section. I figure let's keep all the box office stuff together. So before we go any further, looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have the horror thriller, I guess it's a remake of a foreign language film. It's called Speak No Evil. It's projected to make about 15 to 18 million. I freaking hate the trailers for this movie. It makes me so uncomfortable, which I guess is the point. But literally when I see, like, I love James McAvoy, but when I see this guy's face come up in, like, with this, like, this version of James McAvoy, I get, like, really uncomfortable immediately. So again, not a huge opening. Again, makes sense for September. But, it really depend, I think, on the reaction, but I can't imagine the reaction's going to be super great. Also opening this week is a really small film with Dave Bautista, The Killer's Game. Don't ask me what it's about. I know nothing about this. So it's projected to make about 3 to 6 million. Again, this is the period where we're really starting to move into Oscar season now, so we're going to have a lot more some really small openings. But again, I wouldn't say that either of those two movies are really part of that category. But, we'll just have to see as we kind of go in the weeks ahead. We're gonna have a lot more limited releases opening, and they're gonna be really small, and then they will open wider and wider, and we'll kind of track that as we go.